Welcome to QueerTWENTY, the cohort of 2022. QueerTWENTY is egomonk's annual flagship program where we celebrate exceptional queer Indians succeeding in respective fields such as social justice, arts, science, commerce, etc. Today we have a multidisciplinary person with us, Vikram Kolmannskog. Vikram is a queer of color author, poet, lawyer, and a gestalt psychotherapist. Vikram is of Indian and Norwegian descent and currently is based out of Oslo. Much of Vikram's work is centered around the reduction of unnecessary suffering for various marginalized communities, starting from forced climate refugees to queer communities. Vikram has used his expertise in socio-legal analysis, therapy, and creative writing for working towards these communities he is passionate towards. So without further ado, let's welcome Vikram. Vikram, thank you so much for joining us today. Vikram, through your writings, you seem to merge two usually mutually exclusive areas, which is sensuality, queerness, or queer sensuality, and religion. Can you tell me how did you land here? Like how are you able to kind of permeate these areas into one another without sounding contradictory?
Again, I think ever since I was very little, I was very, very interested in spirituality. So I would kind of, my mother and father, they weren't very practicing themselves, but my mother's family, one of my masis, she was very spiritual, and I kind of, I really looked up to her. She was a great inspiration to me, and I would always, like, when I was visiting, I'd always ask her questions, you know, about different things, like, yeah, like, especially growing up in Norway, there was a lot of ignorance when it came to Hinduism and Indian wisdom tradition. So, you know, you believe in a monkey god, and, you know, all of this silly stuff. So I had so many questions from my masi, like, okay, so why is Hanuman like a monkey? Why does Ganesh have a elephant head? Why do we believe in many gods? What is this like? And yeah, and she was really patient, like trying to share some of her knowledge with me, but it was also her way of living. She was very, you know, she wouldn't harm the smallest fly, you know, like if there was a spider or anything, she would pick it up and bring it out into the garden. That kind of, that gentleness and kindness, there's something there that really moved me. And I think when I started to feel that, okay, my sexuality is different from the, you know, the norm, the mainstream in Norway, I felt a lot of, I guess there was a struggle for me, right? For many, many years. But it was never about like the divine or the spirituality. It was always more about, well, just like society and people. I didn't have this, you know, for some of my friends in Norway, where Christianity is kind of, you know, a very big religion historically and culturally. So some of my good friends, they've had much more of a very repressive religious environment. So like more conservative Christian environment where, you know, you should not be gay. But I never like had that in my spiritual environment. It wasn't about that. But still, you know, I think as I came out and kind of, and I also think there's some similarities in coming out and being queer, or just living a queer life and a spiritual life, because it's about, you know, really questioning who am I, you know, and who am I sexually, gender-wise, etc., but then that can drop even deeper, like, you know, who am I as a spiritual question. So I think they can be very, they can go together very well, I think, spirituality and queerness, in a very radical sense, to kind of challenge some of the more mainstream norms and ways of living. But you know, and there's a reason for your question, right? Because I've always found it very strange that religion and spirituality, there's not much talk about sexuality. And in queerness, there's a very, of course, for good reasons, a kind of a difficult relationship to some religions and spiritual traditions, because there's been some oppression as well. But for me, like, spirituality is, and this is very clear in my latest book, The Becoming Buddha, because it's like everything is included there, right? It's eating, walking, sitting, looking, but also shitting and fucking and everything, because I think that is leading a spiritual life, to really include everything. If we're splitting things off, then we're still not at peace with life as it is, and trying to work with what is. So for me, for example, sexuality can be very playful. Sexuality can also be very beautiful, very intimate. And there's a Zen master, and I think this is so beautiful. He said, kind of the goal of the practice, of spiritual practice, is to become intimate with everything, you know? So that we can see that as a very sensual or erotic attitude, actually, to become intimate with everything. So with a stone, with an orange, when eating it, when walking with the earth, like one of my meditation teachers says, when you walk on the earth, you can walk so that the sole of your foot kisses Mother Earth. You know, it's so intimate. And of course, it can be the same when we are with another human being, sensually, sexually. What kind of awareness do I bring to that? Yeah. So I'm very, very interested in it. And I think one of the reasons why I'm interested in also the erotic and the sexual is because I think also from a therapeutic perspective, so many of our aspects are very activated there, you know, our deep insecurities, our vulnerabilities, our longings, our attraction, repulsion, like so many things are there that I really enjoy exploring. But I've also wondered, like, and I thought I was finished now for a little while, because now I'm 42 years old, I just became a father, like maybe I won't write too much more erotica, but then bam, my book that I'm working on now, which will be out maybe next year, is a praise for a gay porn star, you know? So I was like, I thought I was finished, but hey, it's coming.
Vikram, you are an activist. You have been a staunch advocate for range of issues, like starting from climate change refugees, forced climate change refugees, to queer minorities. When you're advocating for these minorities, what are the practices that you use? I'm asking this question from a perspective of people working in developmental sector or for social causes. They run into something called compassion fatigue. So how do you maintain your zest for doing something better for a particular community while also balancing it with like your personal wellness?
I think that's such an important question, Apurva, and just to say as well, to kind of normalize it a little bit, I've become burnt out at least twice. I had a really, really strong burnout as well once, where I was completely exhausted. So I think it happens, and we don't need to kind of, hit ourselves over the head and say, oh, silly me, why did it happen to me? It's like, okay. But over time, I guess, one thing that has become very, very important to me is, we think self-care is an egotistical thing. In a world that's like in despair, how can I take care of myself? But this is the world, you know? Like when I was working with climate change negotiations, I was flying all over the place. I was very active, very passionate to ensure rights for climate change refugees. And we managed, a small group of us, we really managed to do some, at least formal change, to have some rights recognized. But I was pushing myself so hard. Like my body was like, I was not paying attention to this body. And I was flying all over the place. I wasn't spending time in nature. And it's irony, right? Because we're working on climate change, ecology, these things. And then I got completely burnt out at some point. And then I was also doing my gestalt therapy training. And I think that also helped me pay more attention to what are these processes? What is radical change? And I think like this body is not different from the earth, right? This is water, these are minerals, this is air, and how am I relating to this body? That is also, I think, relating to the earth. So it's not egotistical, I think. It is very important that we can somehow also notice how are we relating to ourselves? Are we pushing ourselves too hard? It's like, it's called burnout, and we're also burning up the earth, right? So it's like, what is that about? Can we sometimes I think, well, several things. I'm very interested in this topic. So one thing is to cultivate joy. I think in a world where there is so much despair, the important thing is not to continue like doom scrolling and becoming overwhelmed. The important thing is to notice small moments of joy and cultivating those. Like, what brings me joy? To not be kind of caught in the narrative that is oppressive, to be caught in this paradigm where like everything is going to hell and you're just like running and kind of, no, step out of that paradigm. And okay, for me, the forest, right? Like, okay, walking into the forest, and sometimes I even just like, I feel I'm exhaling just as I'm imagining it. That's the effect of our natural surroundings on us. And just like walking there, laying down there, spending time there, cultivating some of the playfulness that I had as a child maybe. These things give me a lot of joy, and so that's one practice. And then slowing down. I think we are running so much, and we think we have to run because things are urgent. But sometimes the most radical way and the fastest way we can bring about change is to stop running, I think. It's to actually stop running, to slow down, maybe even rest. And then from that space, what happens, right? From that space, something different could happen, not kind of so much reactivity and again, stepping out of that paradigm a little bit of this, And then another thing that I think about is, for me, compassion when I think that I have to do everything, or when it's like one of two. Oh, it doesn't matter what I do, then I don't do anything. Or if I think, oh, I'm with this client, or I am working on climate change or on certain queer rights issues, and I can't do enough, I can't do enough. Well, that's of course going to burn me out. But if I think, okay, I am part of something larger, I'm part of a movement, maybe if I have a spiritual outlook, I can also see, oh, I'm part of this whole world, I'm part of this whole, so I can play my part in it and kind of work on that. That's different. And also finding something small that I can do, not think that, oh, I have to do, like now, for example, I'm very concerned with the ecological crisis, and that's something I'm also working on in my therapy practice and in therapy training and research. And one thing I do in the workshops with people is, at some point several things. I ask us all to pay attention to a green friend, to a green plant, and see what happens to us, like, and how that maybe calms us, like, rather than being stuck in the mind of all the numbers and everything that's going on, like actually relating to one of our green friends. What happens? We can learn, right? We are young. We can learn from the older family members here, like the trees, like the others. And then we can be calmed down, and then out of love, we can act, rather than out of fear and anger and all of that. So out of love for our green friends, what do we want to do? And then I try to kind of guide us to say, okay, there are so many things we can do, but let's just pick one thing that I want to do, and something incredibly concrete and specific that I can do, and even within the next week, I can make a first step, and I will report to the others in the group what I've done.
Getting fatigued by compassion in a world that is inherently going down the spiral, this should not be taken as a personal failure and a part of the process of making the change.
Yeah, I think there are several things in that question that I really appreciate, Apurva. And one of them is, I think we take too many things personally. you know, too many things we take personally, because it's like both the successes and the failures and everything, right? It comes from so many conditions, right? And I think the individualism that is very strong in the West, and increasingly so in India as well, right? This idea that, oh, I am doing this, it's I am not doing able, or I am able. I think it's an illusion, you know, because actually we interact with so many things. We interact with the trees, with other people, with so many things come together to enable us to do something, or also have us burn out. So it's not personal, I think, and seeing it as personal just adds suffering to it. Like, oh, I am a personal failure, I see others who are able to do this. No, I don't think it is like that at all. When I said, you know, some of the ways that I am trying to address this for me now, it also comes just with experience, with some support, with added awareness. Then something else is possible. It's not very personal again, you know, it's like, then something else might be possible to do. But when I got burnt out, it was just after kind of Black Lives Matter mobilization happening, and I started engaging more in also subtle racism and whiteness in Norway, which I haven't done because it's so exhausting. But I started doing it a little bit, and then I got another kind of, I was burnt out again a little bit, but less so than the first time. And what I could sense as well was this part of me which was like, oh, how could you let this happen again? Or didn't you learn anything? And I was like, no, this I don't need actually. Because that just takes the extra energy, right? I'm like, I'm already like tired now. And this part, I actually don't need this, and it's not helpful to me. And at that point, it was quite easy to let it go as well, because I could be kind. I think that is also the thing, right? And we need some kindness to ourselves as well. And I could just be kind and see, okay, I am tired again now. And what do I do now to kind of, you know, rest and get a little bit better?
Gestalt therapy is a big part of your life now. Like, and you didn't start your professional journey with that. You started as being like as pursuing law. But you definitely did dive into gestalt therapy. So couple of questions around that. One, can you explain to us what this therapeutic model is and how is it different than the coexisting models such as like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, rational emotive behavioral therapy, and dialectical behavior therapy?
Yeah. So I think some of the things that attracted me to Gestalt therapy as a modality are the fact that it's very much about awareness, like increasing our awareness, like bodily awareness. What are we sensing in the body? What's going on emotionally? What kind of thinking is there? But also, what am I aware of around me? So it's kind of similar to some mindfulness meditation approaches, right? To increase awareness, and it's about dialogue. So when I'm a therapist, I'm in dialogue with my client. I share what I become aware of as well, because we believe that is relevant to what's happening between us, maybe. And I can help increase the client's awareness of what is going on in their body, what are they aware of, and using myself actively in that dialogue. So that's something I really appreciate. And also the creativity, like it's there's kind of a license to be very creative in Gestalt therapy within that awareness and dialogue. So, you know, with a client, we can move, we can dance, we can draw, we can sit and talk. Of course, we do that much of the time, but it's not just sitting and talking. It can be very many ways. It's very holistic, you know, like to access our awareness in different ways. Like what do I become aware of as I'm moving my body, for example, or just that I'm not moving my body? What do I become aware of if I kind of contact something in my body, like I feel like there's a lump in my stomach going on here. Maybe we can try to draw that. What does it look like? What kind of colors does it have? To kind of get to know it even better, and then something happens, something changes. So we believe that there's kind of what we call paradoxical theory of change. It's when we really stay with what is and when we explore it with curiosity and some spaciousness, then it can change. Then something else can happen. So this fits really well, you know, with my with my spiritual practice and spiritual outlook on life as well. And in Gestalt therapy, we are interested in kind of the contact between people. So not just the inner psyche, right? It's also about what is happening between us. And that also fits well with my kind of my socio-legal and human rights perspective. I am interested in what is also happening between us. What is the wider field? Not just what's going on in this small therapy room, but there is a wider field. For example, when I work with trans clients or non-binary clients in Norway, there's a wider field, which is very, very harsh. It's been very, very negative in the media and in you know, there's a lot of transphobia and trans negativity in Norway. So of course that has some consequences. Then I'm not the kind of psychotherapist who will say, oh, you know, you just need to change the way you're thinking, or, you know, you can do something else. It's also recognizing, no, we are part of a wider field. This is very difficult. And we are part of it, so maybe we can do something, but we need to recognize that, you know, there is a wider field that is affecting us as well. So for me, that's also a very compassionate and kind of a wise way of looking at it, no? Yeah, I could speak for a long time, I think, about this, but that's maybe a little taste of what Gestalt therapy is. And
you had to give an advice to queer affirmative therapists. What would that be? I'm asking that from a lens of what necessary personal work they should undergo before they address queer clients.
I think that's such an important question, Apurva. And I think if we're thinking of therapists who think of themselves as straight, then I would say that a couple of things. One is to read up, like get some good literature, you know, read up on queerness and queer sexuality, queer identity. So it doesn't become, you know, a client is not paying the therapist for the therapist to ask the client to kind of inform them and give them more knowledge. So the therapist needs to read up, I think, on general issues around queerness, queer sexuality, gender identity. And I'm co-editing a book with two others that will be out next year called Queering Gestalt Therapy, and that is about kind of psychotherapy and introducing some of these other perspectives and how we can look at things and becoming more queer informed, I guess. The other thing I would say to a person or a therapist who thinks of themselves as straight and who wants to work in a queer affirmative way, I think I would say really explore your own straightness as well, right? Because that is also sexuality and a gender identity, which is often just taken for granted, but that can also be explored. What does it mean for me to be straight? And am I really straight? What's going on there? Try to unpack that a little bit, to be curious about your own sexuality and gender identity as well, because that will, how you're relating to your own, I think, gender and sexuality also affects how you relate to other people. And I think, you know, sometimes we think, it's easy to think, I think, for perhaps especially a straight therapist, that if a queer person is coming to therapy, it's about their queerness. But it doesn't have to be, right? And in the same way, if a straight person is coming to therapy, it's about some other issue. It's about romantic love, it's about their relationship to their father, but it can also be about their straightness, because straightness and heteronormativity is extremely oppressive, right? You can only fall in love with and be sexually attracted to a person of the opposite gender. It has to be like this and that and that and that, and sex needs to be of a certain kind, and you know, it's incredibly oppressive. So
yeah, they have a box and you have to fit your experiences in that box.
Right? So I think for me, queering psychotherapy is liberating for everybody. It's not just for queer folks or people who define themselves as queer, it's also liberating for straight people. Because it's not saying that you can't be straight, but it's really just unpacking things and saying, what feels oppressive, and there are some oppressive norms in our society, and what is the space for experimenting or playing or trying out something different, in the therapy room at least. So
Vikram, do you think, given the climate crisis that we are facing, the nature of the law needs to evolve and evolve fast in that context? What individual and collective efforts can we take to kind of restore the planet back to health?
yeah, I think probably many things need to change. And there are so many different levels to work with as well, right? I think for me, it's also like one thing is I was mentioning this very personal level that I'm working on. What can I do in my everyday life? But also, who do I vote for, right? Like, I'm really happy that the Green parties are increasing in power in many European countries. And because their message is not a very popular one, right? It's about, that we have to make some drastic changes. So that's leadership. That's good leadership. But it won't necessarily be so popular with everybody. But that's one thing that I give them my votes, and it's good, important, I think, to vote for the right parties now, to have some other laws come in and legislation come in. And then when you said this about law and change, it also made me think, I remember when I was working more actively with the climate change negotiations, I think it was Bolivia at the time, they had an indigenous president. And they raised, because the whole UNFCCC, is very much about all this technical language and different state parties and their categories and rights and obligations, etc. And then they said about how we also need to talk about the rights of Mother Earth. And I think it's so beautiful, and it's such a different way of thinking as well, right? We need some paradigm shifts also happening in legal thinking, that it's not just rights and obligations for human beings, but it's also, what about all these other beings and the rights of these other beings and other ecological systems? And that is a very different way of thinking for us, I think. I think this speciesism is very pervasive in many also spiritual and also secular traditions, but I'm really inspired by, and it feels very close to me, this kind of, some of the traditions from the Native Americans, how they say that actually the human being, we didn't come as this crowning glory of creation that we can just rule over everything else. No, we are the youngest family members. We came last, right? And we did, if we talk about evolution. So how about we just, be a little bit open and curious, at least, to what our elders have to say, like Grandma Willow, or Entel Spider. What can we learn? Listen to our elders as well. It's such a different way of relating, I think. And so I think in law as well, and in the other fields, we do need some paradigm shifts, some transformation. Yeah.
Within the LGBTQ community, who needs an outside support?
Who needs outside support? Well, immediately I think of trans folks.
Who is your favorite queer role model?
Maybe James Baldwin.
Who is your favorite queer character on screen?
On screen. I've watched what's it called? 4 shots, please. 4 more shots, please. 4 shots, please. Have you seen it? Yeah, one of the 4 women, she's queer, and I like her in that series.
What is one thing that inspires you the most?
Forest.
What is one thing that scares you the most?
I don't know. That's my answer. I'm not sure.
Okay, Vikram, now I'm going to share certain words and I would like your immediate reactions after I have said those words, okay? Okay, here we go. Workplace equity.
Well, important.
Homophobia.
Yeah, exhausting.
Allyship.
Important, and I am skeptical of the term allyship because again it's a little bit like the war metaphor, so So I feel ambivalent about allyship, because then it's like, oh, I'm on the right side of the war against these people. I don't, that's not transformation, I think. Again, yeah.
Ambition.
No, thank you.
Politics.
Oh, politics. Yeah, everywhere, all the time.
India.
India. Oh, I miss India. I do. Yeah.
Vikram, this has been a highly intellectually stimulating conversation. Thank you so much for joining the cohort of 2022.